But just a quick review of where we've been in the last week, and that is from August 12th to August 16th. By now, you should have submitted your annotated bibliography. You should have published the environment section of your stakeholder analysis paper and submitted the stakeholder analysis paper. Keep in mind that publish is not the same as submit, so I explain that in this assessment at a glance. But now we're going to go over the interpret section of the Pragmatic Inquiry ePortfolio. And if we take a look at that, you'll notice the overview, so be sure to read the overview section. This explains the context for what we're doing and explains a little bit more about each of the different activities. You'll notice under the Interpret Assignments, this is, as with the rest of the ePortfolio, this is where you put your response under each of the four requirements. So just in general, there's external conversations, internal conversations, habits and barriers, and maps and images. Those are the four categories of assignments. And now we're going to explain what those are in more detail. So we've moved from the see or the begin, explore, interpret, decide, act. We've completed the explore phase. Now we're in the interpret or judge phase, and this is an important step before we get to decision and action. Often we rush from beginning or seeing to action, and we fail to explore and we fail to interpret the meaning of those things. This is the stakeholder perspective map. We've looked at all of these considerations. We analyzed an organization, we looked at a market, we looked at the different sectors of society and how all of that is embedded in a finite ecology. This is overwhelming. We asked you to look at your challenge question from a number of different perspectives. You probably came up with data that is confusing, it's overwhelming, and that's what we mean by divergent thinking. Now we're going to go in the opposite direction. We're going to try to make sense of this, and that's called convergent thinking. We want to put this into a coherent narrative so that we can then begin to identify what to do and how to persuade others. So the learning objectives for this, we want to interpret the meaning of the analysis from the Explore Openly phase, and we want to use different modalities and reflection tools. So in the Explore phase, it's predominantly rational because we're collecting data and we're looking at evidence and facts. Now we're going to look at different dimensions of human knowledge. We're going to look at our values, we're going to look at emotional content, because in doing this work, we also discover ourselves, and the self is never absent from this research. So as I said before, there's four dimensions to it. The first one, external conversations. If you haven't already, you should interview someone or a couple people that you think that you consider to be an expert or a wisdom figure. What do they say about your challenge question? The goal here is not to convince them of anything, but it's actually the opposite, to listen carefully and deeply to how they view your challenge question. This may challenge some of your assumptions, but it's imperative that we listen carefully to what others say, especially people who have been thinking about this for a long time. The second one, internal conversation. This is a technique for clarifying value. So sit down in a quiet room with a piece of paper and imagine that you are having a conversation with an imaginary conversation with someone you consider to be a wisdom figure. This could be Buddha, this could be Jesus, Mother Teresa, it could be the Dalai Lama, it could be Donald Trump, anybody. Don't get into the tendency here is to start psychoanalyzing why you picked this person, and just let yourself go. Sometimes it's helpful to put an empty chair across from you and just imagine that that person is sitting there and just have a conversation. Ask them a question and let that person respond. Just write down that person's response. This is really a creative exercise, so you have to get past any reluctance or self-doubt. Just get the words down on paper. So you should literally write down the conversation that you have with them, what you say, how they respond. The third assignment is habit and barriers, and I'll explain that in more detail in a minute. And then the last one is to map or draw your challenge question. What does it look like? And I'll explain that in more detail in a minute. For the habits or barriers section, this is a reminder that the challenge question that you chose is a wicked problem. And by wicked, we mean not evil, but complicated. If it were a simple problem, it probably would have been addressed by now. But you've chosen something that is extraordinarily complicated and involves lots of different sectors of society and systems, so there really are no simple or easy solutions. Secondly, there's always a tension between the world as we see it, the world as it is given, and the world as we want it to be, the world as we imagine it. So there's a barrier between those things. What are those habits, patterns, barriers that are working against your solution? So begin to identify them and name them. Because if we're under the impression that things are simple and our solution is going to be easily implemented and adopted, we're deeply mistaken. So it's important to identify what are the headwinds that we're facing as we go forward with our proposed solution. And this last one, break into interest groups. If you can identify people in class who are working on similar issues, hopefully you've had a chance to interact with them. This is important to explore as a group. So if you find someone else that's working on a similar issue, try to reach out to them and see what they've come up with. Now, as we think about our maps and images, it's important to see how this operates in real time. The image you're looking at, the Iraq invasion plan, is a declassified document that was presented to the generals. Actually, it was presented to President Bush before he made the decision to invade. And this was essentially the plan to go into Iraq. You'll notice phase one, there is a timeline, preparation, complete posturing of initial force. Phase 2, attack regime, 45 days. Phase 3, complete regime destruction within 90 days. You'll notice here, phase 4, post-hostilities, and in this box, unknown. Strategic and operational information operations was unknown at that point. Now it turns out that what we didn't know kept us involved in Iraq for many, many years. And one of the problems was that the planners did not anticipate, they didn't know what would happen. They grossly underestimated how local Iraqi civilians would respond to what they perceived as occupational forces. So this is just an example of what you don't anticipate can really ruin what you believe to be a good solution, and what we don't know can do great harm to us. So we have to anticipate as much as we can, even if it's tentative, what is likely to happen. This is a picture of General David Petraeus, who was instrumental in rewriting he wrote the counterinsurgency field manual, but he totally revised the training for the Marine Corps. So in the training prior to Iraq, Marines were highly skilled and trained in conducting war. So they were able to call in airstrikes and do all sorts of things that military operations require. But they learned in Iraq that that was only one small facet of their responsibilities. So they developed what's called the three-block war. On the first block, it's a traditional conventional war where they're fighting uniformed military. And that was uh, with the Iraq invasion. That was Block 1. Block 2 is fighting an insurgency where combatants are wearing civilian clothes. They slip into civilian populations. So this was something new that the Marines had to learn how to deal with. And the third block is conducting purely humanitarian efforts to win hearts and minds. So within the counterinsurgency field manual, you get a sense of the breadth and scope of what's required to be successful in this campaign, and only one small portion of it is using military force in conventional ways. So this next picture is David Petraeus's systems map of Afghanistan. And interestingly, this came out in a New York Times article where many of the top brass in the military were complaining about death by PowerPoint and how they had these slides that were just totally incomprehensible, and they used this as an example. For those of us who are interested in systems thinking, this is pretty incredible. This is David Petraeus's attempt to identify all of the factors and conditions that go into a successful campaign. And you'll notice the different sectors in here. You've got overall government capacity, you've got popular support, you've got infrastructure services and economy, you've got the narcotics trade here, you've got outside support. You've got some of the institutional considerations here. All of these things interact and intersect with one another, which is simply a way of saying that this is a complex system. So as you go forward with your challenge question, try to create a systems map of all of the different sectors that are involved. It doesn't have to be this ornate, but it should represent your best thinking, your best mapping of the space that your challenge question operates within. In addition to a systems map, as the cliche goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, try to collect 10 or 15 images that convey something about your challenge question that no data or words can convey. These images will be critical as you move forward putting together your PowerPoint, because one of the lessons from PowerPoints is that we cannot have 8-point font and slides that are just full of text. People stop reading at some point, and sometimes often a picture can convey meaning in ways that a written report can't. So that's the assignment, the mapping exercise and the image exercise. And hopefully by now you have a better sense of the 4 interpret assignments.